For the past month, we've been looking at the book of Exodus, and today I'm going to try to bring our discussion of the book of Exodus to a conclusion, and I hope tie everything together for you. And so to help you, I want to just review briefly what we've seen about the book of Exodus. When this book of Exodus opened, the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who eventually become the people of Israel, are now in Egypt. They are slaves of Pharaoh, and they are building supply cities for Pharaoh. The God of their ancestors, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, seems to have forgotten them entirely. God no longer seems to remember them. They don't even seem to remember God. So they're not a people. They're enslaved, and there has been a great silence on the part of God. But at a particular moment, God calls Moses, who, even though he is a Hebrew, has been raised in the court of Pharaoh, and he reveals to Moses his name, and he sends Moses to the people of Israel as their liberator, and he instructs Moses to go to Pharaoh and let the people go. Moses is a reluctant hero. He doesn't want to do this, but God insists, and God reveals his name. God's name is I am who I am, or I am who I will be. It's really an ambiguous name, because what it means, you'll discover who I am by what I do for the people. And so there's a great contest at the beginning of the book of Exodus, and the contest is really between Yahweh, God, and Pharaoh. Who really is God? Is Pharaoh the God of his people, or is this God of the Hebrews, Yahweh, is he truly God? And so there are these 10 plagues in which Pharaoh hardens his heart against God, and eventually God hardens the heart of Pharaoh, and the 10th plague is the most destructive, because Pharaoh will not let Israel will not let God's firstborn son, namely the people of Israel, because Pharaoh has enslaved God's firstborn son. God is now going to strike down the firstborn of human and animal in the land of Egypt. Only the people of Israel are spared, because God has told them through Moses to take the blood of a newly born lamb, a Passover lamb, sprinkle it on the doorpost, and God will pass over. God will pass over their homes. It will not strike their firstborn. But God strikes down the firstborn of everybody in Egypt, including Pharaoh's own firstborn, and he sends the Israelites out of Egypt. But then he hardens his heart again, and he pursues them all the way to the Red Sea, and now God performs his great act of salvation for Israel, and that is the Exodus through the waters of the Red Sea. And when Pharaoh and his armies follow, they are drowned in those waters. So you have these two great events, the Passover, whereby Israel is saved by the blood of the Paschal Lamb, and the Exodus, when they are brought out of Egypt into a promised land. the people eventually come to Mount Sinai. And that's where God originally revealed himself to Moses and told Moses his name. And now in a great, great theophany at this mountain of Sinai, God reveals himself to all of the people. And this is a frightening experience for the people. And eventually they say to Moses, "You speak to God for us." So Moses now becomes the mediator between God and the people. Moses goes up to the mountain and God instructs Moses, and Moses comes down and tells the people what God expects of them, and they agree to that. And Moses receives the 10 words, what we call the 10 Commandments at this point, and then he ratifies the covenant, the alliance between the people of Israel and God. And he ratifies it by taking the blood of animals, sprinkling some of this blood on the altar, some of it on the people to show that they are joined together. And now this people, which formerly were a group of slaves, have become God's chosen people, God's elect people. Not for anything that they have done. They've already shown themselves in the wilderness to grumble against Moses and Aaron and eventually against God. But God has chosen them and elected them for reasons that will only become apparent later on. Namely, through them, God is going to reveal his glory to all the peoples of the earth, and he'll do this through the Messiah, whom we identify as Jesus Christ. Now that basically is the story that you find in the first 24 chapters of Exodus. And up to here, the story is pretty easy, and people who start to read the Bible from beginning to end, once they get up to Exodus 25, this is where they stop reading. Why? Because all of a sudden you have all of these 5 chapters in chapter 25 to 31 describing in great detail the tabernacle that God wants Moses to make. I'll come back to that in a moment. And then the story picks up again, and I'll be looking at this in chapter 32, 33, and 34. The narrative picks up, and then after that, it seems to slip away because you go back to the tabernacle and its construction. So I first of all want you to see what is happening here. Then I want to explain why it's happening, and then I'm going to come back to chapter 32 to 34. So at the end of chapter 24, Moses has gone up to the mountain of Sinai. God has called Moses up. In chapter 16, a cloud covers the mountain for 6 days. On the 7th day, Moses enters into the cloud, and there he is for 40 days and 40 nights. Now, what's happening in this period? During this period, God is telling Moses how the tabernacle is to be constructed. What is the tabernacle? Well, the tabernacle was a tent. I have a diagram here that I'll come back to in a moment, where God's presence dwelt with the people. And that tent of meeting, or that tabernacle, traveled with the people through the wilderness for 40 days because it was the presence of God to them. Later on, the basic structure of this tent this wilderness tent or tabernacle becomes the plan for the great temple of Jerusalem, the temple that King Solomon is eventually going to build. Now, why do the sacred authors spend so much time describing this tabernacle? Well, first of all, it must be very important to them because it's where God is going to dwell with them. Secondly, because it is so very important, it's God who describes how they are to build the tabernacle where he's going to dwell. They can't decide what kind of tabernacle God should dwell in. God is going to tell them, this is the kind of tabernacle I want you to build for me. Now, if you just look, so in chapters 25 to 31, Moses is on the mountain and you have these elaborate instructions about the tabernacle. But then when he comes down from the mountain, the people will have committed a great sin of worshiping the golden calf. And now, there's no need to build a tabernacle. God threatens to destroy the people, and the covenant is broken on the part of the people. It's at this point we will see that Moses becomes the great intercessor, and he basically gets into a kind of a debate with God and convinces God that he can't give up on the people. We'll come back to that. So the tabernacle is so the covenant has to be restored. It has to be renewed a second time. We'll come back to that. Once the covenant is restored, then in chapter 36 to 40, Moses and the people can build the tabernacle exactly the way God wanted them to build the tabernacle. And then at the end of it, we will see God enters into the tabernacle and now dwells with the people. Now, a good way to get a sense of what is going on in any story is to look at the beginning and to look at the end. So those of you who are Downton Abbey fans, you remember at the beginning of the story, the Titanic sank. They needed to get someone to marry Lady Mary. And by the end of the story, they get somebody to marry her and also Edith as well. And everything works out nicely. Now, at the beginning of this particular story, the Israelites are in Egypt. It appears God has forgotten them. They are slaves, and they are building buildings for Pharaoh. At the end of the story, they have become God's people. God has made a covenant with them. They are now building a tabernacle for God, and God dwells in their midst. So you can see why this tabernacle is so very important. So we've been talking about the tabernacle. Let's take a look at the diagram here. It will be helpful, I think. The tabernacle complex consists, first of all, of let's say a space about the size of this room, probably a little bigger. You can see it's 75 feet by 150 feet. So that would be larger than this room. And most of it would be a court area, all right? So all these edges, do you see the edges up here? This would be a tent that would provide an area here. Now, over here in this tabernacle, if you're holding the diagram like this, all right, are you with me? Or okay, there would be a bronze altar, maybe about this size. And this is where they would sacrifice animals every day. So it would be kind of a bloody, messy area, but this is where they would sacrifice animals every day. Then you walk a little further, there would be a big bronze laver filled with water where the priest would wash himself before he went into the tabernacle proper, just to cleanse himself. Now, there would be a curtain here, and once you went beyond the curtain, you walk into what is the holy place. Do you see that? And in the holy place, there are three things. First of all, there is a table over here with 12 loaves of bread that are changed each day, representing the 12 tribes of Israel, and they're offered to God. Over here is a 7-branch lampstand, the menorah. And over here is a smaller altar where incense is offered to God every morning and every night. Then we come to a second curtain over here. And behind the second curtain is a place called the Holy of Holies. And here you have a box, which is basically the Ark of the Covenant, like a chest, with an angel or a cherubim on this side, an angel or a cherubim on this side. In the box, in the Ark of the Covenant, are the 2 tablets of the law, the 10 Commandments, and the Ark of the Covenant is sort of the footstool of God, and this is where God dwells. Now this is the Holy of Holies, and eventually only the high priest could come here once a year to make atonement for the sins of the people. Normally, you would never go into the Holy of Holies. That's where God is dwelling. But you would offer incense every morning, every night, and you would offer sacrifices for sins or thanksgiving of animals over here. Does that give you a sense of basically? Now, that eventually then becomes the structure of the Temple of Jerusalem. So, in chapter 25 to 31, I'm just going to tell you what happens here. Moses is on the mountain, and God tells him to take up a collection of materials from all the people so that they can build the tabernacle. Then God gives Moses very precise plans for building the Ark of the Covenant. He gives Moses very precise plans for that table on which the loaves of bread will be. He tells him how to make the lampstand, the menorah. He tells him how to make the cloths, which will form the tent, how to build the framework of the tent, the veil that will be here, and the other veil that will be before the Holy of Holies. He tells them how to establish a courtyard outside of the tabernacle. And then he describes the priestly vestments and what the priest is supposed to wear, and still other vestments. And then he tells Moses how to ordain or consecrate the priest and how to carry out sacrifices. Then in chapter 30, he tells Moses how to build the altar of incense. He tells them that eventually they'll need a tax to support this tabernacle. He explains how to build the basin where the water will be, and the oils and the incense that will be needed. God designates who the artisan will be who will build this tabernacle, and then it concludes with the Sabbath law. So all of this, Moses is on the mountain. He's been there 40 days, 40 nights, and God is giving him all these instructions so that it now becomes very clear that this tabernacle is God's own design. Since it's going to be the place where God is going to dwell, God is going to tell what kind of tabernacle he will dwell in. But now we have a complication. When we come to chapter 32, the people are becoming restless. Moses has become very, very important to them. He is their leader, and he's been gone for 40 days and 40 nights. And because he's not there, they go to Aaron and they say, you build a image of God for us. Construct an image of God for us who will lead us through this wilderness, because this man Moses is not going to come back again. So I'm in chapter 32. When the people saw that Moses was delayed in coming down from the mountain, they gathered around Aaron and they said, "Come, make us a god who will go before us. As for that man Moses who brought us out of the land of Egypt, we don't know what happened to him." So Aaron now becomes complicit with the people. He says, "Take off the golden earrings of your wives, your sons and your daughters are wearing. Bring them to me." So they bring Aaron all of their jewelry. He receives it and he fashions it and he makes a molten or a golden calf. In effect, Aaron and the people have broken the first commandment. "I am the Lord your God. You shall not have other gods before me. You shall not make an image of God." It's not that they think that the golden calf is another god. They want an image of the God who appeared to them, so that that image will be a presence of God to them and lead them out. And so when Aaron has made this golden calf, he says to the people, "These are your gods, Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt." And on seeing this, Aaron built an altar in front of the calf, and he proclaimed, "Tomorrow is a feast day." So Aaron himself has fallen into a grave sin by making an image of Yahweh, the God who brought them out of Egypt. Now the next dialogue is very interesting. If you look at chapter 32, verse 7, the Lord, Yahweh, God, says to Moses, "Go down at once, because your people, whom you brought out of the land of Egypt, have acted corruptly." Anything strike you?
Passing the blame.
Pardon?
Is he passing the blame?
Well, but what strikes you? Your people who brought you out of the land of Egypt. They're not his people. And, he says, they're your people. They have quickly turned away from the way I commanded them, making for themselves a molten calf and bowing down to it, sacrificing to it and crying out, "These are your gods." They've broken the first commandment of the Decalogue by trying to make an image of the invisible God. "I have seen this people, how stiff-necked they are," continued the Lord to Moses. "Let me alone, then, that my anger may burn against them and consume them. Then I'll make you a great nation." God will start all over. Now remember, Moses is well into his 80s, at least if you follow the narrative. So God wants to start all over. He wants nothing to do with the people. In effect, he's going to end the covenant that he just made with the people at Mount Sinai. But now notice Moses' counter-argument. It's very clever in verse 11. But Moses implored the Lord, namely Yahweh, his God, saying, "Why, O Lord, should your anger burn against your people?" So he's turning it, your people, whom you brought out of the land of Egypt with great power and with a strong hand. Why should the Egyptians say with evil intent, he brought them out that he might kill them in the mountain and wipe them off the face of the earth? Turn from your burning wrath. Change your mind about punishing your people. He's reminding God that they're his people. He brought them out. And if he destroys them now, the Egyptians will say he did all of this for naught. And then Moses reminds God of the promises made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, how you swore to them by your own self, saying, "I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, and all the land I promised I will give your descendants as a perpetual heritage." In verse 14, and so the Lord changed his mind about the punishment he threatened to inflict on the people. Moses has now become a powerful, powerful intercessor. Remember, at the beginning he was this reluctant hero. Now he can speak with God and God will listen to him. So Moses now comes down the mountain with the 2 tablets of the covenant in his hands. And notice what it says, tablets that were written on both sides, front and back. The tablets were made by God. The writing was the writing of God engraved on the tablets. It's very important because it shows how important the law is to Israel. These tablets were made by God, and it was God himself who wrote on both the front and the back of them. Now, young Joshua is with Moses, and he mentions the shouting to Moses, and Moses says, this is not the sounds of battle, or victory or defeat. This is kind of revelry going on. So he draws near the camp, and he sees the calf and the dancing, and Moses' anger burned, and he threw the tablets down and broke them on the base of the mountain. So the very tablets that God made and God wrote on, Moses breaks them to show that the people have broken the covenant. Then he does a strange thing. He takes the golden calf they had made, he burns it in the fire and grinds the powder down, puts it on the water, and makes the Israelites drink it. Now, why does he do that? Well, there was, from our point of view, a strange custom in Israel when a woman, and again it's a man's world, was thought to be unfaithful to her husband. They would give her a very, very strong drink like this to force her to confess. And in effect, by giving this drink to the people, Moses is saying, you have been an unfaithful spouse to Yahweh. The next part, I think, is very humorous. Moses asked Aaron, why did this people do what you do to you, that you should have led them into a grave sin? And Aaron replies, do not be angry with me. You know how the people are prone to evil. They said to me, make us a god to go before us. As the man Moses who brought us out of the land of Egypt, we don't know what has happened to him. So I told them, whoever's wearing this gold, take it off. They gave it to me. I threw it into the fire and this calf came out. Earlier, it noticed how carefully he himself had shaped it. But he's not going to take the blame for it. They forced him to do it. He threw their things in there, and this calf came out of the fire. The next part is very, very violent. It's hard to understand for us today, but I'll try to explain what I think is going on. Moses now sees that the people are out of control, and he then comes to the camp and he says, whoever is for the Lord, for Yahweh, come to me. And so a number of people from the tribe of Levi, the Levites, who eventually are going to be the priest in Israel, they come to Moses, and Moses then tells them to strike down all those who have been disobedient, strike them down with the sword, and they kill 3,000 of their own people, their own relatives. And in verse 29, at the end of this, Moses says, today you are installed as priests for the Lord, for you went against your own sons and brothers to bring a blessing upon yourself this day. In other words, they showed their zeal and total dedication to the Lord by destroying all of these rebellious elements. Now again, this is something that doesn't make sense to us. We live in a very different culture. But I think what is in back of this is it's trying to show the zeal, the devotion that the Levites had for the Lord, but on the other hand, to impress upon the reader that there really is no middle ground. You're either for the Lord or you're against the Lord. Now, Moses, now the covenant has been broken. So what's going to happen? We can't, even though Moses has all these plans for the tabernacle, there's no use building the tabernacle. God is not going to go with the people. So Moses now has to make atonement for the sins of the people, and he has to convince God to go along with them on the journey. Otherwise, if God is not going to go with them, you don't bring the tabernacle, do you? You don't build the tabernacle. So in chapter 32, verse 30, the next day Moses says to the people, you've committed a grave sin. Now I will go up to the Lord, and perhaps I'll be able to make atonement for your sin. So Moses returned to the Lord and said, this people has committed a grave sin in making a god of gold for themselves. If you would only forgive their sin. You can see Moses is becoming a much more powerful figure. He's the great mediator before the people. If you will not forgive their sin, then blot me out of the book you have written. So he says, if you're not going to forgive their sins, destroy me. I don't want to go any further. So again, the Lord does what Moses asks. He says, the Lord answered Moses, only the one who has sinned against me will I blot out of my book. Now go and lead the people where I have told you. See, my angel will go before you. When it is time for me to punish, I will punish them. Then I'm going to skip to chapter 33, verse 5. Moses now, the Lord speaks to Moses, and he says, speak to the Israelites. Tell them that they are a stiff-necked people. And this will be a description of them not only throughout the rest of the wilderness journey, but throughout their history. For a moment I would destroy you. Off now with you ornaments. And so either God or Moses, let me think what to do next. Now, the next episode talks about the intimacy between God and Moses. Moses continues to grow in stature. And if you look in chapter 33, verse 7, it talks about the usual way in which Moses spoke to God face to face, as two people might. Moses used to pitch a tent outside the camp at some distance. It was called the tent of meeting because Moses would meet God there. Anyone who wished to consult the Lord would go to the tent of meeting outside the camp, and Moses then would consult the Lord for them. Whenever Moses went out to the tent, the people would all rise, stand at the entrance of their own tents, watching Moses until he entered the tent, because they knew that when he went into this tent, he was conversing with God. As Moses entered the tent, the column of cloud would come down and stand at its entrance while the Lord spoke to Moses. So remember, there's this cloud, a column of cloud that's following the Israelites, leading them through the wilderness, and it's the sign of the presence of God. On seeing the column of cloud stand at the entrance of the tent, the people would rise and bow down at the entrances of their own tents because they knew Moses was speaking with God. The Lord used to speak to Moses face to face, as a person speaks to a friend. Moses would then return to the camp with his young assistant Joshua. Now, so first of all, you have this picture of the intimacy between God and Moses. Only he could speak bouche à bouche, face to face with Moses. But now, God is going to tell Moses that he'll send an angel ahead of them, but he's not going to accompany them. Moses in chapter 33, verse 12, Moses says to the Lord, "See, you are telling me, lead this people, but you do not let me know whom you will send with me." In other words, you haven't told me you, God, will come. You have said, Moses is speaking to God, you have said, you are my intimate friend. You have found favor with me. And so Moses says, if I, Moses, have found favor with you, please let me know your ways so that in knowing you, I might continue to find favor with you. That's an interesting verse. If I have found favor with you, please let me know your ways, so that in knowing your ways I might continue to find favor with you. I have found favor with you, but let me know your ways, O God, that I might continue to find favor with you. And the Lord God answered, I myself will go along with to give you rest. So God now says, yes, I will accompany the people on their journey. Moses says in verse 15, if you are not going yourself, do not make me go up from here. It's a little bit confusing, but Moses says, but if you don't come with us on the journey, I don't want to go either. For how can it be known that I and your people have found favor with you, except that you go along with us? Then we, your people, and I will be singled out from every other people on the surface of the earth. And so the Lord says to Moses, this request too, which you have made, I will carry out because you have found favor with me, and you are my intimate friend. So he's become the great mediator of the people. First of all, God wanted to destroy the people, and Moses convinced him not to. Then God said, okay, I won't destroy the people, but I won't go with them into the Holy Land. And now Moses convinces God to go along with them. And why does God do this? Because Moses has found favor with God, and God calls Moses his intimate friend. Now you can see why Moses is really the central figure of the Old Testament. Nobody has quite the same relationship with God as does Moses. Moses is not finished in asking things of God, and now he wants one more favor. He says in verse 18, let me see your glory. The glory of God is the shining radiance of God. It's like the shining radiance of the sun. You can't quite see the sun. If you look at the sun, you'll eventually be blinded, but you can see something of its radiance. Same with God. If you look at God, you will die, but you might see something of God's glory. And so the Lord answered, I will make all my goodness pass before you, and I will proclaim my name, Yahweh, before you. I who show favor to whom I will, I who grant mercy to whom I will. But you cannot see my face. Now I know earlier it said they spoke face to face, but now he says you cannot see my face. I can explain this one way, that this story is really a combination of different stories that have been put together, and the final editors are not worried about the contradictions that we see. It could also simply mean that in the first account, it says God spoke to Moses face to face. What it really means, he spoke to him intimately, not necessarily seeing the face of God. But now it becomes very, very clear. Nobody can see the face of God, because if you see the face of God, you will die. Here, continued the Lord, is a place near me where you shall station yourself on the rock. When my glory passes, I will set you on the cleft of the rock and cover you with my hand. So the description of God is having a hand until I've passed by. Then I will remove my hand so that you may see my back, but my face may not be seen. It's the transcendent power and glory of God. So the most that Moses can see, even though he's God's intimate friend, and though God has allowed him to see so much, the only thing he can see is God passes by. God will cover Moses with his hand, lest Moses be destroyed, and Moses will see the back of God. That's as close as you can get to God. Now, the covenant is renewed in chapter 34. God then tells Moses to cut 2 stone tablets like the former ones, and he's to go up to Mount Sinai. He's to present himself on top of the mountain. Only Moses is to come here, and God is going to write the law on the commandments once more. So if we look at chapter 34, verse 5, the Lord came down in a cloud and stood with him, Moses, there, and proclaimed his name. So the Lord passed him and proclaimed, I'm in chapter 34, verse 6, Yahweh, Yahweh, a God gracious and merciful, slow to anger, abounding in love and fidelity, continuing his love for 1,000 generations, and forgiving wickedness, rebellion, and sin, yet not declaring the guilty guiltless, but bringing punishment to their parents, for their parents' wickedness on children and children's children to the third and fourth generation. Moses has at once knelt, bowed down to the ground, and Moses said to God, "If I find favor with you, please, Lord, come along in our company. This is a stiff-necked people, yet pardon our wickedness and our sins." First of all, this self-description of God, this is a self-description of God. He says, Yahweh, Yahweh, a God gracious and merciful. Those are the two great attributes of God for Israel. God is gracious and merciful. He's slow to anger. He's abounding in love and fidelity. And he continues in his love for 1,000 generations. He does punish the guilty, but only for a third or fourth generation. Overall, his mercy always abounds more than his judgment or punishment. Following this, and I'm not going to read all of this material, in verses 10 to 26, God gives the law again to Moses. It's a little different from the law that was described earlier, the first time the covenant was described, probably because it's coming from a different tradition or a different source. But it's kind of a summary of the law, and so the covenant is now reestablished. Now I'm going to chapter 34, verse 27. Then the Lord, Yahweh, said to Moses, "Write down these words, for in accordance with these words I have made a covenant with you and Israel." So Moses was with the Lord for 40 days and 40 nights without eating any food, drinking any water, and he wrote on the tablets the words of the covenant, the 10 commandments. So now you can see why not only is the tabernacle or the temple, but the law so important for the people of Israel, because it's not, from their point of view, a purely human law. It's a law that is given directly from God. Now there is this incident that follows. When Moses comes down from Mount Sinai with the 2 tablets of the covenant in his hand, he didn't know that the skin of his face had become radiant while he spoke with the Lord. So he's standing in the presence of God's glory, and that glory reflects on his face, and his face becomes radiant. You might say the way somebody stands in the sun and gets sunburn, but this is different from that. And when Aaron and the other Israelites saw Moses and noticed how radiant the skin of his face had become, they were afraid to come near him. They're afraid to come near him because they know the holiness of God is upon him, and if they stand in the holiness of God, they might be struck dead. Only after Moses had called them did Aaron and the leaders of the community come back to him. Moses then spoke to them. Later all the Israelites came to him, and he enjoined on them all the Lord had told them. When Moses finished speaking with them, he put a veil over his face. And whenever Moses entered the presence of the Lord to speak with him, he removed the veil until he came out of the tent again. And on coming out, he would tell the Israelites all that had been commanded. Then the Israelites would see the skin of Moses' face was radiant, so he would again put a veil over his face until he went to speak to the Lord. Moses has become a central, powerful figure. When he goes to speak with God, he speaks face to face. He's in the very presence of God, and the radiance of glory and the glory of God radiate his face. And so when he goes out to the people to protect them from this glory which could destroy them, he puts a veil on it. But when he goes to speak to God, he takes the veil away and speaks directly with God. Now, the covenant has been restored. And it's been restored thanks to the graciousness and mercy of God, and thanks to Moses, who has made atonement for the people and has interceded for them. That means that the tabernacle can now be built. And so in chapters 35 to 36, the building of the tabernacle takes place. They collect the material, they gather the artisans, they make all the contributions, and then they begin by making the tent cloth, the framework of the temple. They build the veils, the ark, the table, the lampstand, the menorah, the altar of incense, the altar of burnt offering. They make the court of the tabernacle, and then they make all of the priestly vestments. And then if you skip to chapter 39, verse 32, when all of this work is completed, they present it to Moses. So in verse 32, the Israelites did the work just as the Lord had commanded Moses, and so it was then done. And they brought to Moses the tabernacle, the tent with all its furnishings, the clasps, the frames, the bars, etc. So they bring him all of the items of the temple. But then in chapter 40, it's Moses himself who sets up the tabernacle. Then the Lord said to Moses, on the first day of the first month, you shall set up the tabernacle of the tent of meeting. And God tells Moses where to put all of the items within the tent, and he sets it up. And then, in the final verses, chapter 40, verse 34 to 38, the presence of God enters the temple, the tabernacle. Then the cloud covered the tent of meeting. The cloud represents the presence of God. And the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. Moses could not enter the tent of meeting because the cloud settled down upon it, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. Whenever the cloud rose from the tabernacle, the Israelites would set out on their journey. But if the cloud did not lift from above the tabernacle, they would not go forward. Only when it lifted did they go forward. The cloud of the Lord was over the tabernacle by day, and at night a fire in the cloud, and in the sight of the whole house of Israel in all the stages of their journey. So now, look what has happened by the end of the book of Exodus. At the beginning, they were a group of slaves. They were building supply cities for Pharaoh. God had not spoken to them in over 400 years. They had almost forgotten who God was. Now, at the end of the book of Exodus, they have become God's chosen people. God has made a covenant with them, which they broke, but then God renewed this covenant with them. God has given them the law, the Torah, by which they are to live their lives because they are a holy and a priestly people. And by following this Torah, they will find life, they'll be brought into the promised land, and they'll show all the peoples of the world how wise they are because they are God's people. And most importantly, now God is dwelling in their midst, in the tabernacle. A tabernacle that God himself has planned and supervised. And wherever they go on the journey, God will be with them. And when they finally come into the Holy Land, eventually they're going to build a temple where God will always be present to them. From this point forward, the people now have become a nation. There's a lot of things that are going to happen, of course, but they become a nation. They become God's chosen people. And now they and God are bound together in a covenant relationship. Again and again, they're going to be unfaithful to the covenant, but again and again, God is going to forgive them. And then finally, from this people will come the Messiah, the Christ, who will redeem the world. So I'll stop there in case you have questions. Or Catherine.
So when we read in chapter 33, where it talked about the tent of meeting and the column coming down, and whenever Moses would go in and talk to God and come out, and they said Joshua would never leave the tent of meeting. So was this a temporary tent, or is it the same? The tabernacle, the tent of meeting?
That story in chapter 33 seems to be referring to another tent outside the camp. Okay. There simply are. One of the things that makes it difficult to read something like the book of Exodus is not written by one author who makes sure everything fits together nicely. This book is really a compilation of different stories that sometimes are competing, but the sacred author, the people who brought it together, realized that all these traditions were sacred, and so they were more interested in compiling them and keeping them together. Yes?
Father, how about Aaron? When they killed all the rebellious people, did Aaron was one of the ones?
No, Aaron, Aaron will be eventually ordained the first priest for the Israelites. Now, and he'll play a major role in the next book, Leviticus, which is a kind of a handbook for priests, and in the book of Numbers, where he and his sons will be the beginning of the priesthood in Israel. Yeah, so Aaron has failed, but he's forgiven. Because he's probably, yeah. Peg.
The first time Moses comes down from the mountain, he has the stone tablets.
Right.
And the people have built their cow. They didn't know that there was this first commandment.
Well, they did. If you go back to chapter before this, let's take a look so you know exactly what I'm referring to. The Ten Commandments are given in that first theophany in chapter 20. So they knew the commandments. And the commandments, I'm the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall not have other gods before me. This is what they violate. You shall not make for yourself an idol or a likeness of anything in the heaven above or on the earth below. So it's not as though they thought that this golden calf was a different god. They violated the commandment by trying to make an image, and God does not want any image made because God cannot be described in any ways. Once you do that, then you're in control of God.
It wasn't in writing. They didn't have it in writing yet.
Well, but you're right, But if, again, let's go back to chapter 20. If you look at the end of chapter 19, verse 24, so the Lord said to him, Moses, go down and come up along with Aaron, but do not let the priest and the people break through to come up to the Lord, else he will break out against them. So Moses went down to the people and he spoke to them. Then chapter 20, then the Lord spoke all these words. Now, and then skip to verse 18. Now as all the people witnessed the thunder and the lightning, the blast of the shofar and the mountain smoking, they became afraid. Well, and they said, they made Moses their mediator. I think the implication is that they have heard these words, okay? And when Moses ratifies the covenant for them in 24, he has spoken all these words to them.
I just want to add a little bit to that. I don't know if I'm right or wrong, but what I learned is that these people that came with Moses, they were slaves prior to that, and their culture was to honor these animals. Those were their gods. So when Moses didn't come down when they expected him, they were getting nervous. And they went to Aaron and said, they're nervous. That God, there's not really a God there. And so Aaron didn't know what to do because these people were illiterate, very poor, had no education. So they wanted to honor something, and that's why they made the calf, because they were used to honoring animals in their beliefs prior to having Moses.
Well, if you follow the storyline, it's really slightly different. Part of what you say is exactly right. I mean, Moses has been gone 40 days and 40 nights, and he has been leading them. And without him, they don't know where to go. So they want an image of God.
So they go back to what they're accustomed to, which was honoring their gods with an S, plural gods, the animals.
Yeah, but it doesn't say that anywhere in the book of Exodus. It doesn't say that anywhere. They want an image of God.
But you got to think where they're coming from, what their culture is.
Well, then you're reading into the narrative what's not there. Now, I'm just trying to read out of the narrative what is there.
Because they're poor, they're slaves, illiterate, they're really lower class, very low class people who have, in the history, never put the Bible aside, in the history, their gods at their time were the animals.
Well, it doesn't say that in the book of
in the Bible,
no,
in
no.
the history part.
What was
Where they are.
Okay. Maybe.
Father, if they were poor and uneducated slaves, how did they have all the materials to build this?
Yeah.
I mean, these are just
Right. Yeah. I mean that.
build something of that size, and then how did it go?
Yeah.
with it?
Yeah.
I mean, these are all.
All right. Okay. And here we come back to something I've said again and again, and it's how you read the material. If you read the material purely historically, what you say is exactly right. Where would you get all of these things in the middle of the desert? Where would you get all the things for the anointing oil, the incense? You wouldn't have it. But this is a narrative, and you have to suspend your disbelief. And according to the narrative, when they left Egypt, the Egyptians gave them all of this finery. Let me give you an example. This is an example I often used in class, but I think it makes the point. Do you remember the series called Star Trek? Did any of you?
God, yeah.
Yeah, it was a wonderful series. And they're beaming people all over the place. And they're walking in this spaceship the same way you would walk in this room, as though there were gravity. Now, to make something like Star Trek work, you have to suspend your disbelief. You would say, this can't happen, all right? But whenever we enter into a story world, whether it be a movie or somebody is telling us a story, we do suspend our disbelief. Once upon a time, there was a king, and in his kingdom there were these wicked fairies. Well, we know there's no such things as fairies, but we suspend our disbelief. You need to do something similar when you're reading the narrative of the Bible, because the Bible is not a history book. It's not meant to be read. It's historically grounded. There are historical episodes in it, but it's a narrative that has been woven together, and you've been able to pick up yourselves a lot of the contradictions. But you need to enter into that world, suspend the disbelief, so that you can try to see what the narrative is trying to teach you. It's a hard thing to do. But once you get to the point of doing that, then I'm reading through this narrative, and I've read it more times than you, and I can see many contradictions. At one point it says, God writes the 10 Commandments. At another point it says, Moses writes the 10 Commandments. Well, who wrote the 10 Commandments? It says, God spoke to Moses face to face. God says, you can't see my face. If you're trying to read it as a consistent historical story, it makes no sense. But if you realize that these are traditions that have been brought together and that there is an overall narrative going on, and I tried to show you that, the movement from being a group of slaves to people who are now God's people, then it begins to communicate its message to you.